When my mother looked straight at me and said, "You're not half the woman your sister is," my heart clenched. But instead of staying silent like every other time, I pushed my chair back and replied calmly, "Then let her pay the rent for you." My father's face went pale, stammering, "Rent? What rent?" And in that moment, the secret I had kept for 3 years spilled out in front of the entire dinner table. If it were you, could you endure that kind of comparison? And where are you listening to this story from? Let me know in the comments, because I truly want to see how far this story reaches. Hi, my name is Madeline Harris, but most people call me Maddie. I am 28 years old, living in Portland, Oregon, and I work as a financial manager for a logistics company based near the harbor. From the outside, my life looks stable: a steady job, a tidy rented apartment, and a few close friends to share quiet evenings with. But every weekend, when it comes time for family dinner at my parents' two-story house in the suburbs, that sense of stability is shaken. For my parents, Friday night dinners are not just a tradition but almost an unwritten law. No one is allowed to be absent. Every time I say I have work or that I just want to rest, my mother will call relentlessly until I give in, or my father will toss out a half-joking, half-serious line. "This family has a seat for you. Don't leave it empty." And so, week after week, I find myself sitting at the same long wooden table, in front of my mother's cooking, beside my sister Claire, and under the shadow of the expectations my family always places upon me. Claire is 3 years older than me, and since childhood she has been destined to be the star of the family. She is tall, eloquent, once the captain of the debate team in high school, and later received a full scholarship to study law at the University of Washington. My parents often said Claire was born to succeed, and every step she took was met with endless applause from relatives. By contrast, I, the quieter younger sister who preferred numbers over praise, was always cast in the supporting role. I never complained, at least not in front of them. I know what I am good at, and I do not need the spotlight to prove it. But that does not mean the constant comparisons have not left their mark on me. The meal drifted by with conversations revolving around Claire, her job at the law firm, her new house, her plans for decorating the interior. My father spoke with pride in his voice. "She deserves it. She has worked hard and proven herself." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "That's right, Claire always makes us proud. The entire family can look to her with pride." I stayed silent, pushing food around my plate, swallowing each bite with a trace of bitterness. Since the age of 17, I had been working part-time jobs to pay for my own college tuition. I graduated, found a stable job, and had even quietly helped my parents during times when they struggled financially. But no one at that dinner table ever mentioned any of that. In their eyes, everything I contributed was just a silent duty, never as valuable as a property contract Claire had signed. By the end of dinner, when the wine glasses were nearly empty, my mother set her fork down on the table and looked straight at me. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air sharp and cold like a blade. "You are not even half of your sister." In that moment, I felt my heart tighten, but instead of tears as in the past, a strange calm rose within me. I pushed my chair back, the scraping of wood against the floor sending chills through the room. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, then turned to Claire, still wearing her triumphant smile, and said in a voice so steady it was almost icy, "Then let her pay the rent for you." The entire room went silent. Claire blinked in confusion, my mother's eyes widened in disbelief. My father, who had been smiling the whole evening, suddenly turned pale. He forced out each word, as if to make sure he had heard correctly. "Rent? What do you mean?" I sat upright, my hand resting on the chair, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I mean that for the past 3 years, I have been sending money every month to help you pay the mortgage on this house when the family was struggling after the pandemic." In my mind, it was like a film rewinding back to a winter night 3 years ago. That evening, I had just finished working late, still sitting in my rented apartment in Portland, surrounded by stacks of financial papers for clients, when my phone buzzed nonstop. Seeing my mother's number, I froze a little, because she rarely called me at that hour. When I picked up, her voice was trembling, choked with fear. Maddie, we might lose this house. Your father just lost a major construction contract, and we don't have enough to cover the mortgage payment this month. If the bank doesn't receive the money on time, they'll send a notice next week. I remember clearly the icy chill that ran down my spine as those words sank in. Our house, the one I grew up in, the place holding all my childhood memories, was on the verge of disappearing because of a number on a debt statement. My mother sobbed, her voice breaking like someone about to drown. Can you help us just this one time? Just to keep the roof over our heads. After this, your father and I will find a way to pay it back. I didn't hesitate long. At that time, I had been working for a few years and saved a small amount, hoping to buy my own apartment within 2 or 3 years. I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I'll transfer it first thing tomorrow morning." After hanging up, I sat staring at the dark screen, my chest heavy, but I comforted myself, just this once. The family is in crisis. I'll help, and then everything will go back to normal. The next morning, I transferred the money through the bank. My mother called back, her voice filled with relief and gratitude, repeating over and over, "Thank you, just this once." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But once became twice, then 3 times. The next month, my mother texted, "Sweetheart, your father's company still hasn't recovered. Can you help just this month? Next month we'll manage on our own." I agreed again. The following month came with the same promise, just this once. Little by little, those transfers became a routine, until I eventually set up an automatic payment schedule with the bank. Every time I saw my account balance drop, I told myself, family comes first, I'll rebuild my savings later. But deep down, I knew my dream of owning my own apartment in downtown Portland was slipping further away. I remember one particular evening, working late at the office, when my father called. His voice no longer carried its old confidence but was rough and heavy. "Maddie, I hate having to ask you, but this month we really can't make it. If we lose the house, your mother will fall apart. I promise, just this month." I sat there, staring out the glass at the drizzle falling onto the street, feeling both pity and anger. Pity, because my father had lost the pride he once carried. Anger, because once again, I had to put my own dreams on hold. And yet, I nodded, almost by reflex. 3 years, over 36 transfers, more than $70,000. That was the sacrifice I had made. And yet, within the family, not once had anyone acknowledged it. Not once at these dinners had a single word of thanks been offered to me. To them, everything I gave seemed invisible, as if it were simply the expected duty of a daughter, still unmarried, without dependence, with a steady income. End of try. And now, sitting at that dinner table, when I finally spoke the truth, my parents immediately denied it. My mother furrowed her brows, her voice trembling. "We never asked you to do that. You must be mistaken. If you chose to help, don't bring it up now." My father crossed his arms, trying to reclaim authority. "Maddie, we appreciate that you once helped, but bringing it up like this at the dinner table is inappropriate." Hearing their words, I let out a bitter laugh. Inappropriate? For 3 years, I quietly helped you keep this house, and tonight I sit here listening to Mom say I'm not even half my sister. Don't you see the injustice in that? That room felt so heavy that it seemed as if every sound outside had been muted, leaving only my heart pounding. After I spoke the truth I had buried for 3 years, silence fell over the dinner table. Claire sat still, her hands clasped together, eyes looking away as if this had nothing to do with her. My parents reacted exactly as I had imagined, denial, avoidance, then shifting the blame onto me. And in that moment, a memory crashed over me like a wave, tied to a familiar feeling. I had always been the invisible one in my own family. Since I was little, whenever relatives gathered, I would sit at the small table while Claire stood in the living room, telling jokes, performing a short dance, or reciting passages by heart. Everyone would clap and say, "She's clever and lively, she's sure to succeed." Me, the child who liked to hold a pencil and calculate, who sat meticulously building Lego diagrams, would get only a brief comment. Maddie is quiet, very sensitive. That label stuck with me through childhood like a shadow I could never shake. In class, my math scores were always top, yet when my parents boasted to acquaintances, all they mentioned was, "Claire just won a debate prize. Claire made the debate team." I stood behind them, clutching my A-plus paper, feeling like nothing more than a faded backdrop. Those memories flooded back as I sat at the dinner table today. I wanted to scream, "What about me? What did I do wrong? I paid your debts, I kept this house from being foreclosed, I worked my tail off since I was 17 to pay my own tuition." But those words stuck in my throat. Instead, I heard myself whisper almost inaudibly, "Why am I always just a shadow?" No one answered. My mother set down her spoon and looked at me with a gaze that was half gentle, half reproachful, then sighed. "You are always too sensitive. We never thought you were less important. It's just that Claire's path is more visible. You have to understand." I gave a bitter laugh. More visible, meaning her work is in the spotlight, while what I sacrificed is only meant to be hidden? My words fell into the silence. Claire shifted slightly, but still said nothing. I looked at my mother, searching for a trace of recognition in her eyes, but all I saw was avoidance. In that moment, I realized the problem was not money. It was not the $70,000 that left my account. What hurt me so deeply was the truth that for years I had never been seen. My contributions, my efforts, they were all treated as a given, like an unnamed shadow in this house. I bent my head, clenched my hands, trying to stop the tears from falling. The feeling was a mix of sadness, humiliation, and a sudden clarity. I looked up, and for the first time I met my parents' eyes, without looking away. I spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "I understand now. The issue was never about money. The issue is that no matter what I do, you will never acknowledge me. I was never enough, and I will never be enough, because in your eyes I am only the shadow behind Claire. I am done." The short sentence carried years of exhaustion, and all the times I had swallowed my hurt, and it shot into the air like an arrow. My father snarled, his voice like flint. "If you leave, do not come back." The words were so bitter I could feel each one sink into my skin, like a sentence condemning me to give up every remaining comfort. And I knew, from that moment on, a line had been drawn inside me. I no longer wanted to chase their approval. That night, after the dinner ended in silence, I drove back to my small rented apartment in downtown Portland. The trip home felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because my mind was so tangled I lost track of how many times the lights had changed. My parents' words echoed in my head, "You are always too sensitive. Don't turn dinner into a list of what you've done," and worst of all, the way they avoided my eyes when I mentioned the 3 years of mortgage transfers. I stepped into the apartment, turned on the lights, and a heavy quiet settled over everything like a thick blanket. I dropped my bag on the floor, took off my shoes, and almost immediately collapsed into the small dining table by the window. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and navigated to the scheduled transfers section. Every month, exactly on the 15th, a sum had been taken straight from my paycheck and sent to my parents' account. For more than 36 months, it had run quietly like clockwork. I stared at the screen, the cursor waiting, and after a few hesitant seconds, I clicked cancel. A confirmation popped up. "Are you sure you want to stop this automatic payment?" I took a deep breath and pressed yes. That was it. The first feeling that hit me was painful, as if I had just cut off a piece of myself. For 3 years I had tied my identity to those payments. Maddie, the daughter who took care of the family, who sacrificed, who put others first. Now that I had severed it, I felt hollow, as though I had betrayed the duty I had carried so willingly. I closed my laptop, walked into the kitchen, and poured a glass of water with hands that were still shaking. But then I went back to the table, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder I had kept all this time. Inside were the printed bank statements, neatly arranged by month, from that winter 3 years ago up to the most recent one. I spread them across the table, the black and white sheets covering the small surface. The numbers stood out: 500, 1,000, some months 1,500, even 2,000 when my parents said, "This month is harder than usual." I added them up, pencil marks crisscrossing the page, and when I finished, the total stared back at me: more than $72,000. I sat motionless, staring at that number. The first wave of pain surged through me again. 72,000, money that should have been the down payment for the apartment I dreamed of in downtown Portland, or at least enough to begin a life free from renting. My chest tightened, my eyes burned, and once more I asked myself, why did I let this go so far? I remembered every moment when I gave up a piece of myself just to keep helping them. The first time I said no to a trip with friends because I didn't have the money, when in truth I had just sent off that month's mortgage payment. The time I postponed applying for graduate school because my savings account wasn't what it used to be. And the time I turned down the chance to move into a larger apartment when my landlord raised the rent because I couldn't cover the deposit. Every choice circled back to one thing: keeping my parents' house standing. But they never told anyone. To them, it was as if it had never happened at all. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the papers spread across the table. Beneath the layers of pain and disappointment, a new feeling slowly crept in: relief. For the first time in 3 years, I realized I had truly cut the cord that tied me to that unspoken responsibility. No more automatic deductions, no more text alerts from the bank reminding me of a shrinking balance each month. I sat still, feeling a cold breeze slip through the window, drifting into the empty space inside me. But that emptiness wasn't only dark, it also carried a fragile sense of freedom. I thought about the future, about that $72,000. If I could save again with my current salary, fueled by this new determination, then in just a few years I could place the down payment on my very own apartment. The thought made me smile without realizing it. A small smile, but more genuine than any forced grin I had worn at family dinners. I whispered to myself, that money should have been the down payment for my own home. And for the first time, I believed it wasn't so far out of reach. That night, I didn't turn on the TV, didn't play any music. I simply sat in the silence of my apartment, the warm yellow light spilling over the scattered statements. I left them on the table, letting them stand as both a reminder of all that was lost and the start of something new. And when I finally lay down in bed, I knew that tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter not defined by desperate midnight calls, but by the choices I made for myself. After that night, with the bank statements still scattered across my small dining table, I knew I could no longer live on autopilot. The loop of work, send money, sacrifice, silence had formally closed, and for the first time in years, I felt as if control of my life had been returned to me. The next morning, instead of rushing to the office with a heavy heart, I put on my workout clothes and stepped outside to run along the Willamette River. Portland was crisp, the mist still hanging over the water, and each footfall on the path felt like shedding another layer of the gloom that had built up over the past 3 years. I started slow, then picked up the pace, breath coming harder but my chest strangely lighter. Maybe finally I was running for myself, not racing to catch up to my sister's shadow or meet my parents' unreasonable expectations. I began to change small habits. On Thursdays each week, I signed up for a cooking class at the community center, a place full of different people. Young mothers learning new recipes, middle-aged men hoping to surprise their wives, and international students far from home. In that roomy kitchen under bright lights, no one knew me as the sister who's always compared to her successful sibling. They only saw me as Maddie, a woman who loved making Italian food, clumsy with desserts but good at seasoning soups. We laughed when a loaf burned at the edges and applauded when someone succeeded with their first tart. Here, I realized, no one measured my worth by property deals or law firm titles. They saw me through simple sincerity and small joys. I also began reconnecting with the world outside of work. A new group of friends invited me to go hiking on the weekends around Mount Hood. Standing at the summit, looking down at the endless stretch of green pine forest, I took a deep breath and felt as though my body had been reborn. I was no longer Maddie curled up in an apartment, calculating transfers to my parents, but Maddie, who was free, allowed to dream of things just for herself. In the evenings at home, instead of opening my laptop to worry over spreadsheets, I opened a book, brewed a cup of tea, and let myself enjoy the silence, a silence no longer tied to duty or sacrifice. My work also began to shift for the better. Perhaps when my mind was no longer crushed by unfairness and heavy responsibility, I had more energy to focus. I took on tougher projects, stayed late at the office to complete financial analyses for major clients. One evening, the company director happened to walk by, saw me still bent over spreadsheets after hours, and paused to pat my shoulder. "I like your dedication, Maddie," he said. "This company needs more people like you." That short compliment, to me, was worth more than all of my mother's bitter comparisons. At least here, I was recognized for my own effort. A month later, I was given the role of team lead for a new project. The feeling of standing before the conference room, presenting the financial plan to the entire board, made my heart race but filled me with confidence. When I finished my presentation, colleagues applauded and my boss nodded in approval. I walked out of that room with feet so light they barely touched the ground. That was the moment I realized I was no longer a shadow. I was standing in my own light. Then one day, an email arrived from Seattle. A fast-growing fintech startup wanted to hire me as their director of financial analysis. The salary was more than 40% higher than my current pay, plus equity in the company, an opportunity I had never dared to imagine while buried in family obligations. I printed the email and sat staring at it on my kitchen table, my mind full of questions. Moving would mean leaving Portland, the city that had shaped my adult years. At the same time, it would be a step toward freeing myself from the invisible net my family had been casting around me. I remembered the night I had counted every bank statement, my mother's words, "You are not even half of your sister," and my father's evasive look when I mentioned the money. A voice rose in my head, "It's time." I called my closest friend and told her about the offer. She screamed with joy. "Maddie, you have to take it. This is the new beginning you deserve." Hearing that enthusiastic voice, my chest warmed. I opened my laptop and replied to the email. "I accept." 4 words, but 4 words that freed me from the weight of my past. In the weeks leading up to my move to Seattle, I was both busy and excited. I walked around Portland more often, stopping by the little cafe under the Burnside Bridge, sitting by the window and watching people pass by. I knew the city had witnessed the years when I carried the weight of my family's burdens, but now it was also witnessing me stepping out to claim my own worth. As I packed my belongings and took the pictures off the walls of my rented apartment, I didn't feel sadness. Instead, it felt as though I was peeling away old chains, one layer at a time. On my last day in Portland, I ran again along the Willamette River. This time, I carried no heaviness with me, only a sense of exhilaration. I knew challenges lay ahead, but at least they would be challenges of my own, chosen by me. When I stopped to take a long breath, I heard my heart pounding not from worry or fear, but from the pure happiness of finally beginning to live for myself. 6 months after arriving in Seattle, my life had changed faster than I could have imagined. My job at the fintech startup pulled me into a demanding but exhilarating rhythm. I learned to work alongside brilliant, creative minds, people who didn't care who you were or where you came from, only about the value you brought. In that harsh but fair environment, I found the recognition I had longed for all those years. My salary was higher, my shares grew more valuable, and I watched my savings account climb month after month. One evening, sitting alone on the balcony of my rented apartment, I opened my personal spreadsheet, added up the numbers, and realized I finally had enough for the down payment on my first home. My heart raced like it had when I ran along the Willamette River, but this time not to escape sorrow, but out of excitement. I scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent over the weekend. We toured several apartments, some spacious but dark, others bright but too far from the city center. I didn't want to rush into a decision. I had waited too long, sacrificed too much to reach this point. I needed a place where I could walk in and immediately know, this is my home. And then, when we stepped into a unit on the 16th floor of a newly built tower, I froze. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a sweeping view of Seattle, with the Space Needle rising proudly against the clear blue sky. The apartment had only one bedroom, not very large, but sunlight poured into every corner, the polished wooden floors gleamed, and the compact kitchen was perfectly equipped. I stepped onto the balcony, the cool breeze brushing my face as I looked down at the bustling city below. In that moment, I knew. This was where I wanted to belong. The process of buying the apartment took a few weeks, but with each passing day, my excitement grew. When I finally signed the contract, my hands trembled not with fear, but with joy. I held the keys in my hand, the cold metal sweeter than anything I had ever touched. On the first day I stepped into the empty apartment, I dropped my bag on the floor, stood in the middle of the living room, and looked around. No furniture, no noise, only open space and a clear view of the Space Needle. I drew in a deep breath, and inside me a single thought rang out clearly. For the first time, everything is mine. Not thanks to anyone else, not bought at the cost of silent sacrifices, but entirely through my own effort. In the days that followed, I began decorating the apartment in my own way. I chose a light gray sofa, a small oak dining table, and a tall bookshelf nearly reaching the ceiling to hold my favorite books and a few green plants. I hung a landscape painting of Portland on the wall, a reminder of the place I had left behind to find myself. Every item I bought was chosen carefully, not because of money, but because I wanted everything here to reflect me, not anyone else. When night fell, I would stand out on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker, and feel a peace I had never known before. One evening, I snapped a photo from the balcony, just a corner of the Space Needle glowing in the fiery orange sunset, and posted it on my personal page. I didn't write much, just a short caption. A new beginning. I thought of it simply as a way to mark a milestone in my life. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. The notification showed Claire's name. Her message was only a few words. "You're really something. Why didn't you tell the family?" I stared at the screen, a rush of mixed emotions rising inside me. In her words, I heard more sarcasm than praise. As if my buying a home was something she hadn't expected, or worse, something that threatened her role as the successful one in the family. I typed a few words in reply, then stopped. I turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I no longer needed to say anything. I no longer needed recognition from her, from my parents, or from anyone else in the family. This apartment, this life, was the clearest proof of all. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, put on some soft jazz, and settled onto my new sofa. The space around me was still bare, but inside, for the first time in years, I felt complete. I was no longer Maddie, who sacrificed in silence, no longer Maddie curled in the shadows of comparison to her sister. I was Maddie, the woman who dared to cut the ties of the past, who built her own life, and who now sat in her own home, watching the city lights shine beyond the glass. One weekend afternoon, as I was tidying up my new apartment in Seattle, my phone rang. The screen lit up with the name Mrs. Jensen, the elderly neighbor who lived across from my parents in Portland. I was a little surprised since we hadn't spoken in so long, but I answered. Her voice was cheerful, though tinged with hesitation. "Maddie, dear, how have you been? I have something I thought you should know. I just walked past your parents' house and saw a large banner hanging outside. It was quite something. Let me send you a picture." Before I could respond, she had already texted it. When the screen lit up, my heart clenched. On the familiar wall above the front porch hung a wide white banner, bold red letters stretched across. "Congratulations, Claire, for preserving the family home." I stared at the words, my breath caught, my vision blurring. The sight pierced straight through me like a blade. I had to read it over and over to believe it wasn't some cruel joke. Preserving the family home? Could it be they had officially put Claire's name on the house papers? I sank back onto the sofa, my hand trembling as I held the phone. The bright apartment in Seattle suddenly felt cramped and oppressively quiet. A flood of memories burst in my mind, late nights making transfers, my mother's pleading messages of just this once, the numbers on the bank statements more than $72,000. And now, it was all wiped away, as if it had never happened. In the story they were rewriting, I was completely invisible. A numbness spread through my body and soon turned into a burning heat in my chest. I felt stunned not only by the loss of material recognition, but by the outright betrayal. They weren't merely ignoring my efforts, they were deliberately erasing the traces and handing the glory to Claire as if I had never sacrificed a single cent. In their eyes, I had never existed. I was an outsider, someone sidelined in the very house I had helped keep. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. But these tears were not the same as before, they were no longer helpless despair. This time, a different resolve rose within me. I could not allow the truth to be buried. I could not let them construct a false story that turned Claire into the savior and cast me out. They could hang a banner, they could add my sister's name to the deed, but I held the evidence. I had each bank statement, every email, every message. I had the truth. I jumped up and moved to the dining table where my personal financial files still lay stacked. I pulled out the folder I had prepared long ago, every transfer receipt carefully annotated by date. The final total remained clear: $72,000. I flipped through the pages, my finger tracing the numbers, a fire rising inside me. They can rewrite the story, but I will bring the truth to light. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my laptop, reopened the spreadsheet, and reviewed every payment I had sent over the past 3 years. I compiled everything into a tidy financial report, complete with a bar chart showing each month. Watching the numbers move, the picture became unmistakable. Without me, that house would have collapsed long ago. I even printed my mother's messages. "Maddie, just this once. If not, the bank will take the house." Those pieces of evidence felt like hammers breaking through the wall of lies they had built. The moment I hit save, I leaned back in my chair, my chest heaving. I knew a storm was coming. But this time, I was no longer afraid. If the truth embarrassed them, that was not my fault. I had stayed silent for too long and had been treated like a shadow. Now I would let the light expose everything. And when that happened, I would not need to shout or cry. I would let the numbers and the evidence speak for me. In the quiet of my new apartment, I sat and watched Seattle blaze outside the window. For the first time, I could see the path I would take. No longer the family's lifeline that they could use to drown me, I would become the voice of the truth. This time, they would not be able to ignore me. News about the family appreciation dinner reached me through a relative, my cousin Sarah, the only person in the family who still kept in touch and sometimes checked in. One afternoon she called, hesitating, "Maddie, I think you should know. Your parents are planning a big party in Seattle. They call it a family appreciation dinner." I was asked to prepare the slideshow, but I guess you already know what the party is for. I frowned, though I was not truly surprised. My parents never missed an opportunity to make Claire the center of attention. Sarah lowered her voice. "They say they want to emphasize her role in preserving the family home. I think it's unfair, but I don't dare say anything." I thanked Sarah for being honest, then sat for a long time in the empty apartment, watching the city lights outside the window. They had hung the banner, and now they planned a party to formalize the false narrative. If I stayed silent again, it would mean I accepted being erased from the family's history. I pulled my folder closer, opened my laptop, and began working as if preparing a major financial project. I scanned every bank statement from 2020 to 2023, clearly marking the transfers to my parents' account. I recalled each note: mortgage support, helping out, just this month. I compiled everything into a massive Excel sheet and imported it into the professional analysis software I use at work. On the screen, bar charts appeared: this month high, that month low, but the overall expense line kept rising. I looked at the final figure, bolded in the corner: $72,000. My hands trembled on the keyboard. That number was not just money. It was 3 years of my youth, sweat, missed opportunities to buy a home, my life sacrificed for a house that was now pushing me out. I didn't stop at the numbers, I added a clear timeline. The day my father lost his construction contract. The midnight call from my mother with the message, "Maddie, if you don't help this time, the bank will take the house. Just this once, I promise." I still had that text, the shaky words glowing in the darkness of my phone. I believed it, and I wired the money that very night. I inserted a screenshot of that message into the report, placing it right below the heading, "The promise just this once." And beneath it, the chart, 36 instances of just this once. I shaded the bar graph from green to red so that anyone who looked could see this wasn't chance, it was systematic sacrifice. While polishing the report, I thought about how my parents would react. They would be furious, they would deny it, but this time I had a weapon. The truth, laid out sharp and undeniable. I wouldn't need to scream, I wouldn't need to plead. I only needed to stand tall and let the numbers and evidence speak for themselves. And then, the opportunity came from Sarah. One evening she called again, sighing, "I finished the slideshow they asked me to make. It's just pictures of the house, Claire standing on the porch, captions like, 'Thank you Claire for keeping the family's fire alive.' It feels so fake." I sat in silence for a moment, then asked, "Sarah, can you send me the file? I'd like to give a few suggestions." She hesitated, but finally agreed. When the file arrived, I opened it and scrolled to the final slide. Just as I expected, bold words filled the screen. "Thank you, Claire, for preserving our family home." I took a deep breath and got to work. I copied the entire file and made a separate version. All the photos and all the captions remained unchanged. I wanted the party to appear normal so that at the final moment the truth would explode. I added a sequence of slides following Claire's section, first a timeline of the transfer dates and amounts, then a 3-year bar chart, and then screenshots of the messages my mother sent me. I kept the final slide very simple. A photo of the house taken last summer with bold text underneath. "This was my contribution, don't forget it." When I ran through the slideshow, my heart pounded. Not out of fear, but because I was ready. Late that night, I saved the file in 3 different places. My laptop, a USB drive, and the cloud. I could not let a technical failure ruin the plan. I carefully prepared a printed financial report, bound it together, and put it in my bag. I pictured the scene. My parents standing before the relatives, proudly recounting Claire's deeds, while I would quietly step forward, plug the USB into the projector, and let the truth reveal itself. I would not need to say much. Just one sentence that kept repeating in my head. "If the truth embarrasses you, that is not my fault." In the days leading up to the dinner, I lived calmly on the surface while a fire burned inside me. I went to work in the mornings, led meetings, and signed reports for the company. In the evenings I returned home, sat at the dining table, and stared at the folder and USB set neatly before me. I rehearsed in my head how I would walk forward, how I would plug in the USB, how I would say that single sentence. No trembling, no hesitation. Everything had to be decisive and steady, like a verdict delivered in silence. I would no longer be just the sister who was always compared, no longer a faded shadow. I would step forward, and this time, everyone would have to see me. The restaurant in downtown Seattle glowed like a grand stage. That evening I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time before going inside. From a distance, I could see the familiar cars of relatives and silhouettes moving behind the windows. Everyone was dressed formally, radiant, as if preparing for a grand ceremony of honor. Family appreciation dinner. I smiled faintly, the cynic in my head still whispering. They call it a family party, but in truth it's a one-way show for Claire. Inside the restaurant, warm golden lights flooded the main hall. My father stood at the head of the long table, microphone in hand, wearing a self-satisfied smile. My mother sat beside him, eyes shining, and Claire, the central figure, wore an emerald dress, her hair neatly pinned up, smiling gently as if she truly carried the weight of the family on her shoulders. I stood quietly by the doorway, listening to my father's words. "We are so fortunate to have Claire, the daughter who preserved the family home, who stepped up to make sure our family never lost our place of belonging." Applause swept through the room. I saw a few relatives lean in and whisper, nodding. In all that praise, no one mentioned my name. No one spoke of the nights I stayed up worrying about the mortgage, or the 3 years of regular transfers. I might as well have never existed. The slideshow began playing on the large screen. Familiar images appeared one after another. The house blanketed in winter snow, Claire standing proudly on the porch with a radiant smile, my parents with their arms draped around her. Words stretched across the slides. Thank you, Claire, for keeping the family's fire alive. Claire, our pride. The hall filled with laughter, clinking glasses, lively chatter. I clenched my fists, feeling the blood in my veins boil, yet I stayed still, waiting for the exact moment. And then it came. When the final slide appeared, instead of the words, "Thank you, Claire," the screen flickered and shifted to a stark white background with bold black letters. Financial contributions 2020-2023. 7,200美元. The entire room froze. Forks and knives stopped midair, chairs halted halfway pushed back. Someone gasped, others lifted their heads to look around. I could hear the pounding of my own heart, but outwardly I remained calm. I pushed open the back door of the hall and stepped inside under the stunned gaze of everyone. My heels struck the wooden floor with steady, echoing steps that carried through the silence. I stopped at the end of the room, lifted my chin, and spoke clearly, slowly, and firmly. If the truth embarrasses you, that is not my fault. For several seconds, no one uttered a word. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector fan. Then, from one corner of the table, someone began to clap. The applause spread to another, then another. At first scattered, the sound quickly gathered into a steady rhythm, resonating through the hall. I looked around and saw my relatives' eyes shifting toward my parents, some filled with shock, some with reproach, and some with disappointment. My father's face drained of color, both hands gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles turned white. My mother sat frozen, lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't form a single word. And Claire, the one who had been celebrated just minutes earlier, bowed her head, cheeks burning, her mouth opening soundlessly. I saw her shoulders shake, her eyes dart away, as if her whole world had just collapsed. I stepped forward, the lights falling directly on me, illuminating every line of my face. I did not shout, I did not accuse. I simply looked straight at my parents and said again, 3 years. $72,000. Without that money, the house would have been gone long ago. You know it, and I know it. But you chose silence. You chose to invent another story. So let the whole family hear the truth. The room erupted in murmurs. An uncle leaned toward his wife and whispered, I remember she once said she was working so many extra hours back then, now I see why. An aunt shook her head. My God. How could they let Maddie carry it all and give the credit to Claire? The whispers spread quickly, like fire catching on dry grass. I saw my mother shrinking into her chair, eyes red and wet. My father sat upright, but his face was stone, his throat tight, unable to muster a defense. I turned back to the screen, where the number $72,000 still glowed. I raised my hand and pointed at it. This is the truth. This is the person who kept the house. No one can deny it. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, then lowered my hand. The hall seemed to hold its breath before the applause rose again, this time stronger, spreading across every table. A few relatives even stood, their eyes filled with support as they turned toward me. Claire lifted her head, eyes brimming with tears, looking at me as if for rescue. But I did not respond. I hadn't come to comfort her, nor to reconcile. I had come to expose the truth. The atmosphere of the dinner shifted completely. The laughter and chatter vanished, replaced by searching, uneasy glances aimed at my parents. It was no longer a celebration of Claire, but a silent tribunal for them. I drew a long breath, turned to leave, when I heard my mother call softly, Maddie. Her voice trembled, almost pleading. But I only shook my head. I told you already. The truth is never my fault. Then I turned my back and walked straight out, leaving behind the whispers, the stunned faces, and a family unraveling in silence. The cool Seattle night wrapped around me as I stepped outside. I paused on the steps of the restaurant, lifting my gaze to the glittering sky. Inside me, there was no gloating, no sense of victory, only relief. The weight of 3 years had finally been set down. And I knew, from this moment on, no one could erase me, no one could deny the truth that I had been the one to keep their house standing. 2 days after the dinner, while its echoes still rippled through the family, someone knocked on the door of my new apartment. I peered through the peephole and saw my parents standing there. My mother wore a heavy coat, her face exhausted, eyes swollen as if she had been crying all night. My father looked downcast, hands in his pockets, suddenly smaller than the authoritative figure he had projected at the restaurant. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. They stepped inside, their eyes hesitating as they took in my new space, bright, tidy, clean, completely different from the tense atmosphere of the old house where I had poured money into keeping them afloat. My mother spoke first, her voice trembling, nearly breaking. "Maddie, I'm sorry. We were wrong to stay silent, wrong to let you bear everything. We didn't realize how much you had sacrificed. After that night, we talked, we will add your name to the deed. You deserve it. You kept the house intact." I stood still, looking into her eyes. Once, those words would have brought me to tears, thinking finally I had been recognized. But now, standing in my own apartment with the keys on the table and walls painted in colors I had chosen, I realized I no longer needed that promise. I shook my head, calm but firm. "I have a home now, Mom. I have my own life. I don't need to be tied to the past anymore." I watched my mother's lips tremble and my father turn his face away, his throat tight. They didn't expect such a simple answer. My father cleared his throat. "But that is your work. You deserve." I cut him off, my voice gentler but resolute this time. "What I deserve is not a name on a paper. What I deserve is respect. And you did not give me that. I don't need to prove anything more. I have everything already through myself." I remembered everything. The nights I sent money in silence, the times I swallowed my tears while hearing Claire praised, the moments of despair when I realized I had been erased from the family story. All of it had led me here. I no longer blamed myself for sacrificing, because those sacrifices had forged the resilience within me. I no longer longed to have my name written on the deed of the old house, because I already had a place of my own, a place built with my own strength and faith. I sat for a long while, watching the city lights reflect on the distant river. In that moment, I understood a simple truth. My value had never been in the labels others placed on me. The sensitive sister, the one less capable than Claire, or the daughter who only helps out. My true worth lay in the resilience I built for myself, in the courage to keep walking when wounded, and in choosing my own path even when it came at a cost. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and let my breath blend with the sound of the wind. An old chapter had ended. From this point on, I was no longer the shadow standing behind Claire. I was Maddie, the woman who had kept the house alive through silent sacrifice, but more importantly, the woman who had kept herself whole. And for the first time, I felt light enough to smile, not forced, but real. The Seattle night blazed on, and I saw clearly one thing. I had rewritten my story, and it was no longer bound to denial, it was bound to the truth I chose to live. A final message echoed in my heart like a whisper to anyone who had ever been like me. Your value does not lie in the labels others place on you. It lies in the resilience you build for yourself.